The summer of 1857 descended upon Georgia like a suffocating blanket, wrapping 𝘎𝙗𝙖𝙞 Plantation in oppressive heat that made even breathing feel like a burden. The cotton fields stretched endlessly under the merciless sun, white bowls dotting the landscape like scattered prayers that would never be answered. At the heart of this empire of suffering stood the great house, white columns rising like monuments to power, verandas sweeping wide to catch breezes that never came, windows reflecting a sky too bright to look upon directly. Samuel had learned long ago not to look up at that house with anything resembling hope or desire. At 20 years old, he had mastered the art of invisibility that kept slaves alive, eyes down, movements efficient, thoughts hidden behind an expression of patient servility. Born on this plantation to a mother who died bringing him into this world of chains, he had never known freedom, yet somehow he carried within him a spark that refused to be extinguished. "Boy, come here," the overseer had barked one scorching afternoon in early spring. Samuel had been working the fields, his hands already calloused beyond recognition, when his life took an unexpected turn. "Master Hargrave wants you in the house. Clean yourself up first. You smell like the fields." The transition from field slave to house servant was rare and viewed with suspicion by both whites and blacks. Field slaves saw it as betrayal, a stepping closer to the master's world. House slaves saw it as intrusion, one more mouth competing for scraps of favor. But Samuel understood immediately that this was survival, nothing more. In the house, he might live longer. In the fields, the sun and the whip killed men before 30. Margaret Hargrave had requested him specifically, though he didn't know why. He learned later that she had noticed him one afternoon when her carriage passed the fields. Noticed how he helped an elderly slave carry water, how he moved with a strange dignity despite the degradation surrounding him. She had asked her husband for that quiet one to assist with household tasks, and Thomas Hargrave, barely paying attention to his wife's requests anymore, had agreed with a dismissive wave. The great house was a different world. Polished floors reflected lamplight like still water. Heavy curtains blocked out the harsh reality of the plantation. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. But Samuel quickly learned that beauty often concealed rot, and this house was rotting from within. Margaret Hargrave was 37, though the loneliness had aged her in ways that powder and fine dresses couldn't hide. Once, she had been a belle of Savannah society, courted by eligible men with lesser fortunes but warmer hearts. She had chosen Thomas for his wealth and status, a decision she regretted every day of her married life. He treated her as he treated everything he owned, as property, valued for appearance but dismissed in substance. Samuel's duties were simple at first: polishing silver, tending the garden, caring for the horses. He worked silently, efficiently, making himself useful while remaining unobtrusive. But Margaret found reasons to call him inside more frequently. She needed help moving furniture. She needed someone to reach high shelves in the library. She needed assistance carrying music sheets to the piano. "You can read," she said one afternoon, not as a question but as a statement of surprised discovery. She had caught him glancing at an open book on the side table, his eyes moving across the words before he could stop himself. Samuel froze, fear flooding through him. Literacy was forbidden for slaves, punishable by whipping or worse. "No, ma'am," he said quickly, his voice carefully neutral. "Don't lie to me, Samuel." Her voice was soft, not threatening. "I saw your eyes. You were reading those words." When he didn't respond, she continued, "Who taught you?" "My mother knew some letters," he admitted quietly, knowing denial was useless. "Before she passed, she taught me in secret. I taught myself the rest, little by little, when I could." Margaret studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. A recognition of shared imprisonment, perhaps, though their cages were vastly different. "It will be our secret," she said finally. The library is dusted every Tuesday. I trust you'll be thorough." Thus began a dangerous intimacy. On Tuesday afternoons, while Thomas Hargrave conducted business in town or rode through his cotton empire on horseback, Samuel would dust the library slowly, carefully, while Margaret read aloud from her favorite books. At first, she read alone as if he weren't there. Then she began asking his opinion, tentatively at first, then with genuine interest when his responses revealed a mind that hunger for knowledge had sharpened rather than dulled. "You think Hamlet was justified?" she asked one afternoon, sunlight slanting through the windows and painting golden rectangles on the floor. "I think he was trapped," Samuel replied carefully. "By circumstances he didn't create, forced to choose between bad options and worse ones. Like most people, ma'am." The parallel wasn't lost on her. Their eyes met for a moment too long, and both looked away quickly, understanding that something forbidden was growing between them. Not just the prohibited education, but a connection that transcended the brutal hierarchy that governed their world. Summer deepened, and with it, their bond. Margaret began requesting his presence in the music room. She would play the piano, Chopin, Mozart, pieces that spoke of longing and melancholy, while Samuel stood by the window, ostensibly adjusting curtains or cleaning glass, but really just listening. The music filled spaces inside him that he hadn't known were empty, creating an ache for beauty in a world designed to deny him any. "Do you like this piece?" Margaret asked one evening, her fingers pausing on the keys. "It sounds like sadness trying to become joy," Samuel said softly, "but never quite making it." "Yes," she whispered. "That's exactly what it is." The summer, Thomas Hargrave left for a week-long business trip to Atlanta. Everything changed. A storm rolled in the second night he was gone, violent and sudden, shaking the house with thunder and turning the world outside into a chaos of wind and rain. Lightning illuminated the windows in brilliant flashes, followed by darkness so complete it felt like the world had ended. Samuel was in the back hallway when he heard the crash. Something heavy falling in the music room. He ran there without thinking, finding Margaret standing amid broken glass, blood running down her hand where she had cut herself. Trying to close a window the wind had blown open. Rain poured through the opening, soaking the floor, the curtains whipping like ghosts. "Let me," Samuel said, rushing to close the window while she cradled her bleeding hand. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice shook, and not just from pain. The storm had frightened her, or perhaps it had merely been an excuse for the fear that lived inside her constantly. Samuel secured the window, then gently took her hand to examine the cut. It wasn't deep, but it needed binding. "I'll get bandages," he said. "No." Her voice was urgent. "Stay. Please, I don't want to be alone." They stood there in the darkness, punctuated by lightning flashes, his hand holding hers, both of them acutely aware of the transgression this represented. A slave touching a white woman voluntarily was a death sentence. But in that moment, with the storm raging outside and isolation wrapping around them, the rules seemed distant, unreal. "Samuel," she said softly, "do you ever imagine a different world? One where people aren't divided into masters and slaves, white and black, owner and owned?" "Every day, ma'am," he admitted. "Every single day." "Don't call me ma'am, not tonight." She looked up at him, and in the lightning's flash, he saw tears on her face, mingling with the rain that had blown in. "Tonight, we're just two people. Two lonely people in a storm. Mrs. Hargrave." "Margaret," she corrected. "My name is Margaret." "This is dangerous," Samuel said, though he didn't pull his hand away. "If anyone knew—" "No one will know." She stepped closer, and he could smell lavender and desperation on her skin. "I'm so tired of being alone, Samuel. So tired of being touched without being seen, spoken to without being heard. You see me, you hear me. When did that become a crime?" "The moment I was born into chains and you were born free," he said, but his voice was rough with an emotion he had no right to feel. She reached up and touched his face, a gesture so tender it nearly broke him. Then tonight, let us both be free. Just for tonight, let me feel something other than emptiness. When their lips met, it was with the desperation of two drowning people finding air. Samuel knew he was signing his own death warrant, but in that moment, he didn't care. For once in his 20 years of life, he was choosing something for himself, claiming a moment of humanity in a system designed to strip him of it. They moved through the darkened house like shadows, Margaret leading him to a small room at the back, a guest room rarely used, far from where the other house slaves slept. Rain hammered the roof above them, thunder providing cover for their transgression. "Don't speak," Margaret whispered, placing her finger against his lips. "Tonight there are no words. No master, no slave. Just skin and breath. And this moment we're stealing from a world that would deny us everything." Afterward, they lay in the darkness, knowing they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Samuel should have felt guilt, fear, regret. Instead, he felt human. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was more than property, more than an animal in human form. He felt like a man. "I know this changes nothing," Margaret said into the darkness. "Tomorrow the sun will rise, and I'll still be Mrs. Hargrave, and you'll still be my slave, but tonight was mine, ours. They can't take that away, they can't." But Samuel knew better. The world they lived in took everything eventually. The storm passed, and Thomas Hargrave returned from Atlanta, none the wiser. Life resumed its cruel normalcy. But something had fundamentally shifted. Margaret would catch Samuel's eye across a room and look away quickly, her cheeks coloring. He would brush past her in a hallway, and both would feel the memory of that night crackling between them like residual lightning. It happened again 3 weeks later, and then again. They told themselves each time would be the last, but the loneliness that had brought them together was insatiable, and the brief moments of connection had become an addiction neither could quit. "We have to stop," Samuel said after the 4th time, watching dawn light creep through the curtains of that secret room. "Eventually we'll be caught, and when we are, they'll kill me. They might kill you too." "I know," Margaret whispered, but her hand found his anyway. "I know." Meanwhile, another complication was growing, one neither of them had anticipated. Eliza Hargrave, the 18-year-old daughter of the house, had recently returned from a finishing school in Charleston. Beautiful, educated, and painfully naive, she embodied all the contradictions of Southern womanhood. Raised to be ornamental, yet intelligent, submissive, yet proud, refined, yet strangely ignorant of the suffering that surrounded her privilege. Eliza had always been kind to the house slaves, a kindness born of genuine innocence rather than calculated benevolence. She said please and thank you, asked about their families, and seemed genuinely distressed when she witnessed cruelty. Her mother worried that she was too soft for this world, too dreamlike to survive its hardness. "You're the one who works with the horses," Eliza said to Samuel one afternoon, finding him in the stable. "Father says you have a gift with them." "I try my best, Miss Eliza," Samuel replied, keeping his eyes on the horse he was brushing. "Don't do that," she said softly. "Don't make yourself smaller. I hate when people do that." When he looked at her in surprise, she continued, "I know what I'm supposed to believe, that some people are meant to serve and others meant to rule. But it never made sense to me. You have the same eyes I do, the same hands. Why should your worth be less than mine?" "Careful, Miss Eliza," Samuel said quietly. "Those kinds of thoughts are dangerous." "All the best thoughts are," she replied with a smile that was too bright, too innocent for the world she lived in. Over the following weeks, Eliza found more and more reasons to visit the stable. She claimed she wanted to learn to ride better, to care for the horses, to understand their nature. In truth, she was drawn to Samuel in ways she didn't fully understand. He was unlike any man she had met in her rarefied social circles. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, and his responses showed a depth of thought that the vapid young men of her class couldn't match. "Tell me something true," she said one afternoon, sitting on a hay bale while Samuel worked. "Not something proper or polite, something real." Samuel considered carefully. "I want to be free," he said finally. "Not just physically, though, that too, but free in my mind. Free to learn, to think, to become whoever I'm meant to be. That's the cruelest part of slavery, Miss Eliza. Not just the chains on your body, but the ones they put on your mind, making you believe you're less than human." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." She stood and moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell rosewater on her skin. "You deserve freedom, Samuel. You deserve everything." "Miss Eliza, you should go back to the house," Samuel said, alarm rising in his chest. This felt too similar to how things had started with Margaret, and he wouldn't let it happen again. But Eliza had her mother's loneliness and her father's determination. Why? Because it's improper? Because society says we shouldn't even speak as equals? "I'm tired of those rules, Samuel. They're choking me." "Those rules keep people alive," he said sharply. "You can afford to be tired of them. I can't." His harshness should have driven her away. Instead, it seemed to intensify her interest. In the twisted logic of her sheltered world, his resistance made him more authentic, more real than the young men who fawned over her at parties. She began to confuse his humanity with heroism, his survival instincts with nobility. Late summer brought a heat wave that made the nights nearly as unbearable as the days. Thomas Hargrave left again, this time for a 3-day trip to Savannah. Margaret, feeling ill with what she attributed to the heat, asked Samuel to bring her medicine to her room. A dangerous request, but she made it anyway. He found her sitting by the window in her nightgown, looking pale and drawn. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, setting down the tray with her medicine. "Close the door," she said softly. "Mrs. Hargrave?" "Close it, Samuel. Please." He did, his heart beginning to race with a familiar mixture of desire and dread. "You shouldn't ask me here. Not at night. Not like this." "I'm pregnant," Margaret said bluntly, her eyes meeting his. 2 months along. It's yours." The room tilted. Samuel grabbed the bedpost to steady himself. "That's impossible. Your husband hasn't touched me in over a year," Margaret finished. "He has his pursuits elsewhere. Everyone knows, even if no one speaks of it." "Then we're dead," Samuel said flatly. "When the child is born, the child will look like me," Margaret said with desperate hope. "I'm pale. You're not dark. There's a chance. And if there's not..." Samuel's voice was harsh with fear. "If that baby comes out with skin that tells our story, they'll kill me, Margaret. They'll burn me alive in the town square while people cheer. And you..." He couldn't finish the thought. "Then we run," Margaret said wildly. "We take the money I've been hiding and we run north and we'd be caught before we reach the county line," Samuel finished. "You know that." They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices crushing them both. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "I won't let them hurt you. Whatever happens, I'll claim it was someone else. I'll say..." A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. "Mother!" Eliza's voice came through the wood. "Are you all right? I heard voices." Margaret's eyes went wide with panic. Samuel looked desperately around for escape, but there was none. "Just a moment, darling," Margaret called, her voice strained. She gestured frantically for Samuel to hide behind the wardrobe, a pathetic hiding place that wouldn't fool anyone. Eliza opened the door before Margaret could reach it. Her eyes went immediately to Samuel, half concealed behind furniture, then to her mother in her nightgown, then back to Samuel. Understanding dawned slowly on her face, then horror, then something else, a pain so deep it seemed to age her in that instant. "Eliza," Margaret began, "I thought it was me." Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was the only one who saw him as more than a slave. But it was you, my own mother. Sweetheart, it's not. Don't lie to me. Eliza's voice rose to a shout, then dropped back to a whisper, remembering the other servants in the house. I was falling in love with him, Mother. And you were all ready. She couldn't finish. Miss Eliza, Samuel said quietly, stepping out from his inadequate hiding place. Please, this is my fault. Your mother is old enough to make her own choices, Eliza spat. As am I. She looked at her mother with betrayal in her eyes. Did you know I had feelings for him? Margaret's silence was answer enough. Get out, Eliza said to Samuel, her voice cold. Get out before I scream and wake the whole house. Samuel fled, leaving mother and daughter to face each other across a chasm that had opened in one terrible moment. He didn't sleep that night, certain that dawn would bring his death. But dawn came quietly, and the household stirred as normal, and no alarm was raised. What he didn't know was that Eliza, after hours of crying and rage, had made a decision. She would prove she was not like her mother. She would prove that what she felt for Samuel was pure, real, transcendent. She would make him choose her. 2 days later, when Samuel was working in the garden, Eliza approached him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. Meet me by the lake tonight, she said quietly. After everyone sleeps, we need to talk. Miss Eliza, I don't think... Please, she said, and the desperation in her voice mirrored her mother's so exactly that it frightened him. Just talk, that's all, I promise. Against his better judgment, he agreed. That night, he slipped out after midnight, moving through shadows to the small lake at the edge of the property. Eliza was already there, sitting on a flat rock, moonlight turning her white dress to silver. I'm not angry anymore, she said without preamble when he approached. Or rather, I'm angry at this world that makes what you and my mother did necessary. She's lonely. You're trapped. I understand. Miss Eliza. But I need you to understand something, Samuel. She stood and moved toward him. What I feel for you isn't born of loneliness. It's not because I'm trapped in a marriage I despise or because I need something forbidden to feel alive. I love you, truly, and I know you feel something for me too. I've seen how you look at me. No, Samuel said firmly. Whatever you think you saw, don't lie to me. Not you. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, too weary to fight anymore. I know the world we live in. I know what they call someone like me who loves someone like you. But I don't care. I'll leave everything behind. We'll go north, change our names, start over. Your mother is pregnant with my child, Samuel said bluntly, hoping the harsh truth would break through her romantic delusions. In a few months, that truth might destroy us all. And you want to add to that disaster. Eliza flinched but didn't release his hand. Then we have even less time to waste. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Please, Samuel, give me one night. One night to pretend this world doesn't exist, that we're just two people who found each other. If you truly feel nothing for me, I'll never speak of this again. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, this is madness, Samuel whispered, but he didn't pull away. Then let us be mad together. What happened that night by the lake was a different kind of forbidden than what happened with Margaret. With Margaret, there had been desperate loneliness, mutual need, an exchange between two broken people seeking temporary relief. With Eliza, there was something more dangerous, the illusion of love, of possibility, of transcendence. She believed in it with the fervor of youth, and Samuel, exhausted by impossible choices and seeing no future that didn't end in death anyway, let himself believe for one night. Afterward, lying on the grass under stars that witnessed but didn't judge, Eliza said, I would die for you. Do you believe that? Yes, Samuel said, and he did. But I'd rather you lived. Then we'll both live. Together. But fate had other plans. 6 weeks later, Eliza missed her monthly cycle. 2 weeks after that, Margaret's pregnancy began to show. The two women avoided each other, each wrapped in their own terror and shame, neither knowing the other carried the same secret, the same impossible burden. Thomas Hargrave noticed his wife's condition first. "Finally," he said with satisfaction over dinner one evening. "I'd begun to think you were barren. Took you long enough." Margaret said nothing, pushing food around her plate, nausea from more than pregnancy making it impossible to eat. "Father," Eliza said suddenly, her voice strange, "I have news as well. I'm expecting." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas's fork clattered to his plate. Margaret's face went white. Samuel, serving wine, nearly dropped the bottle. "What?" Thomas said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm pregnant, Father. I wanted to tell you before it became obvious." "Who?" The single word was sharp as a blade. "Robert Morrison," Eliza said, naming a young man who had courted her briefly before she dismissed him as boring. "We were indiscreet, but he'll marry me, I'm sure, once he knows." Thomas's face went purple with rage, but it was directed at the absent young man, not his daughter. Eliza had protected Samuel with a lie, even as her eyes found his across the room, holding his gaze for one desperate moment. The household descended into chaos. Messages were sent to the Morrison family. Robert Morrison, bewildered but trapped by honor and his family's insistence, agreed to marry Eliza quickly and quietly. Thomas Hargrave was furious at the scandal but consoled by the fact that it would be contained, the marriage making everything respectable if rushed. But whispers began among the house slaves. They had eyes. They had seen Samuel coming from the direction of the lake that night. They had seen the way Miss Eliza looked at him. They had noticed her visits to the stable. And one, an older woman named Ruth, who had served the Hargraves for 30 years, had seen Samuel leaving Mrs. Hargrave's room on more than one occasion. Ruth loved the Hargraves with the complicated love of long servitude. She had nursed Margaret as a child, had been more mother to her than the cold woman who bore her. The thought that Margaret had betrayed her husband, and with a slave no less, was unbearable. Worse, the thought that Eliza had followed the same path made her feel she had failed in her duty to protect the family's honor. She went to Thomas Hargrave one afternoon while he sat in his study, reviewing accounts. "Master," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you about a matter of great delicacy." What Ruth revealed that afternoon was a partial truth, designed to protect Eliza while exposing Margaret. Because in Ruth's twisted logic, Margaret was the corrupting influence, the one who should have known better. She told Thomas about seeing Samuel leave Margaret's room. She told him about their meetings in the library, the music room. She suggested that Margaret's pregnancy might not be the blessing he thought. But she said nothing about Eliza, believing that the girl could still be saved if Margaret was removed as an influence. Thomas Hargrave listened in silence, his face an unreadable mask. When Ruth finished, he simply nodded. "You may go." He sat alone in his study for hours, rage building inside him like a storm. His wife, his property, his slave. The violations were almost too enormous to comprehend. But he was a man who prided himself on control, on appearing civilized even when dealing with barbarity. He would not act rashly. He would act perfectly, making an example that would be remembered for generations. He waited 3 days, planning carefully. Then, on a morning when the household was stirring to life, he sent for Samuel. "Bring that boy to me," he told the overseer. "Chain him first." Samuel was dragged from the stable, chains clapped on his wrists and ankles. He knew immediately what had happened. The only question was how much Thomas knew and how far his vengeance would reach. Thomas stood on the veranda as Samuel was brought before him, every slave on the plantation assembled to watch. Margaret stood at an upper window, her face pressed to the glass, horror-struck but powerless. Eliza was being held in her room by Ruth, who had locked the door for her own protection. "Do you know why you're here, boy?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Samuel said nothing. Speech was pointless now. "You forgot your place," Thomas continued. "You dared to look upon what was mine. You dared to touch what was sacred. And worst of all," his voice rose to a shout, "you planted your mongrel seed in my wife's womb." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Margaret's wail could be heard from her window. Some slaves looked at Samuel with pity. Others looked with anger. He had doomed them all to increased scrutiny and harsher treatment. "The law is clear," Thomas said. "The punishment is death, but not quick death. You will hang slowly, and your body will be left as a reminder to anyone who forgets their station." "No!" Margaret's scream cut through everything. She appeared on the veranda, having torn past servants who tried to restrain her. Her belly was just beginning to swell with pregnancy. "No, Thomas, please, it was my fault. I seduced him. He had no choice." "A slave always has the choice to refuse and face the consequences," Thomas said coldly. "He chose wrong." "Then punish me," Margaret begged. "Divorce me, cast me out, lock me away, but don't kill him." "Oh, I'll punish you," Thomas said with terrible calm. "You'll watch him die. You'll birth that abomination you carry, and then I'll sell it south to the worst plantation I can find, where it will work itself to death in cane fields. And you'll live with that every day for the rest of your miserable life." Margaret collapsed, sobbing. 2 house slaves helped her inside, away from the scene. The hanging was to take place that afternoon, public and brutal. The overseer prepared the rope, testing its strength. A wagon was brought to serve as a platform. Samuel was locked in the tool shed until time, left to contemplate his death. But Margaret had not given up. While Thomas made his preparations, basking in righteous fury, she slipped into his study and removed the key to the gun cabinet. She loaded 2 pistols with shaking hands, tucking them into the folds of her dress. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the plantation assembled again. Samuel was brought out, the rope already around his neck. Thomas gave a speech about order, about the natural hierarchy, about the consequences of transgression. "Any last words, boy?" he asked Samuel. Samuel looked across the crowd and found Margaret's eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Sorry for the pain he had caused her, sorry for the child who would suffer, sorry that love in this world was a crime more serious than any hatred. "Put him up," Thomas ordered. As the overseer moved to position Samuel on the wagon, Margaret stepped forward. Her hand emerged from her dress holding a pistol, pointed directly at her husband's chest. "Let him go," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Margaret," Thomas said with condescending patience. "Put that down. You don't know how to use it." "You'd be surprised what I learned growing up with brothers," she replied. "Let him go, or I swear to God, I'll shoot you where you stand." For a long moment, no one moved. The plantation seemed to hold its breath. Then Thomas lunged forward, grabbing for the gun, and it discharged with a deafening crack. But Margaret hadn't shot her husband. Instead, in the chaos of his lunge, the bullet had gone wild, striking the rope that held Samuel. It snapped, and Samuel, seeing his chance, ran. "Stop him!" Thomas roared, and the overseer raised his own rifle. Margaret turned and fired her second pistol, not at Samuel, not at the overseer, but at her husband. The bullet caught Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him around. In the chaos that followed, screams, confusion, slaves scattering, overseers shouting, Samuel ran into the woods, and chains still on his wrists. Margaret stood holding the smoking pistol, waiting for what came next. The overseer's rifle turned toward her, and she closed her eyes, expecting death. "Don't," Thomas gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Don't kill her. Lock her in her room. Call for the doctor. And send riders after that slave. I want him brought back alive so I can kill him properly." But Samuel was gone, vanishing into the Georgia woods like a ghost. Days of searching found no trace. He had survived, though at what cost, no one knew. The scandal destroyed the 𝙎𝙖𝙖𝙫𝙚𝙨 standing in Georgia society. Thomas recovered from his wound, but withdrew into bitter isolation. Margaret was locked in her room, a prisoner in her own home. Eliza married Robert Morrison in a quiet ceremony, then was sent to his family's plantation in Alabama, far from the gossip. 7 months later, Margaret gave birth to a boy with skin several shades darker than either parent. Thomas took one look at the child and ordered it removed from his sight. The baby was given to a slave woman to nurse, then sold south as promised, disappearing into the vast machinery of slavery. Eliza gave birth 3 months later to a daughter, when the midwife pulled back the blanket, revealing skin that was unmistakably mixed race. Robert Morrison's face went white. "That's not mine," he said flatly. "Please," Eliza begged. "Please, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." Robert's voice was cold. "You're a whore who lay with a nigger. I'll not claim that thing as mine." He left that night and filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, providing the baby as evidence. The Morrison family, furious at being deceived, made sure the story spread throughout Alabama and back to Georgia. Eliza, alone with her baby daughter, found no sympathy from anyone. She wrote to her father, begging to come home. Thomas's reply was brief. "You are no daughter of mine. The house is closed to you." Desperate, Eliza took her daughter, whom she had named Hope in a burst of defiant optimism, and fled to Savannah, hoping to lose herself in the city's anonymity. But there was no anonymity for a disgraced white woman with a mixed-race child. Doors closed, jobs vanished, even churches turned her away. She ended up in a boarding house in the poorest quarter, working as a seamstress, raising hope amid poverty and whispers. The child grew, beautiful and intelligent, but marked by both her mixed heritage and the scandal surrounding her birth. Meanwhile, Samuel had made his way north through a combination of luck, help from sympathetic people along the Underground Railroad, and sheer determination. He reached Philadelphia and lived under an assumed name, working at a stable and trying to forget Georgia, trying to forget Margaret and Eliza, trying to forget the children he had left behind. But a year after his escape, a letter reached him through the network of former slaves. It was from Ruth, the woman who had betrayed Margaret to Thomas. Guilt had eaten at her until she felt compelled to write. The child Mrs. Margaret bore was sold south to the 𝙎𝙗𝙖𝙫𝙚𝙨 Plantation in Louisiana. I don't know if he still lives. Miss Eliza's child is with her in Savannah, living in shame. Mrs. Margaret died 3 months ago. They say of a broken heart, but I think it was more. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. She just gave up. Master Thomas drinks himself to death slowly. The plantation decays. We are all paying for what happened, but you most of all lost everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I only write so you know the fates of those involved. Samuel burned the letter after reading it, but its contents seared themselves into his memory. He had survived, but at the cost of so many lives, so much suffering. The weight of it pressed on him daily. In 1863, when war came and Lincoln freed the slaves, Samuel was working as a blacksmith in Philadelphia. He had married a free woman, had children of his own, had built a small life. But he never forgot Georgia, never forgot the children he had fathered into slavery and shame. After the war ended, he made his way back south, searching. The 𝙎𝙗𝙖𝙫𝙚𝙨 plantation in Louisiana had burned during the war, its records destroyed, its slaves scattered. He never found his son. But in Savannah, after months of searching, he found Eliza. She was 31 but looked 50, worn down by poverty and struggle. Hope was 9 years old, beautiful and bright despite their circumstances. Samuel knocked on the door of their tiny rooms, and when Eliza opened it, they stared at each other across 8 years of suffering. "I came to see if I could help," Samuel said quietly. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "It's too late for help," she said. "We're already destroyed." "No," Samuel said, looking past her to Hope, who watched with curious eyes. "She's not destroyed. She's Hope, exactly like her name." Eliza let him in, and they talked for hours about Margaret's death, about the plantation's ruin, about Thomas Hargrave's descent into alcoholic dissolution. They talked about survival and guilt and the ways love had become a weapon used to destroy them. "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked finally. "Any of it?" Samuel considered the question carefully. "I regret the suffering. I regret the children who paid for our choices. But I don't regret feeling human, even briefly. In a system designed to strip me of humanity, those moments of connection, wrong as they were, destructive as they became, they were the only times I felt real." Eliza understood. "What do we do now?" "We survive," Samuel said. "And we make sure Hope knows her story. Not the shame they would wrap her in, but the truth. That she was born from love in a world that made love a crime. That her existence is proof that the system they built could be broken, even if the cost was terrible." Samuel visited them regularly after that, providing what financial help he could. He never told his Philadelphia family about Hope. That secret was too dangerous, even after emancipation, but he made sure Eliza and Hope had enough to survive. Hope grew up knowing her father's story, understanding the complex web of choices, desperation, and forbidden connection that led to her birth. She carried the shame that Savannah society heaped upon her, but also a quiet pride. In a world that said people like her shouldn't exist, her very existence was rebellion. In 1872, when Hope was 18, Samuel fell ill. He made the journey to Savannah one last time, wanting to see her before he died. They met in a small park, and he told her everything. About her mother Margaret, about the plantation, about the night of the storm. "You carry the blood of two worlds," he told her. "The world that enslaved and the world that was enslaved. That's a heavy burden, but also a gift. You understand both sides of humanity in ways people who live in just one world never can." "Did you love them?" Hope asked. "My mother Eliza and the other woman?" Samuel thought carefully before answering. "I loved what they represented. Escape, humanity, recognition. Whether that was love itself or just desperate need, I'm still not sure. But I loved you and your brother from the moment I knew you existed. You were innocent of all the sin and shame they heaped on you. My brother," Hope said softly. "Do you think he's alive?" "I hope so," Samuel said. "I hope somehow, somewhere, he survived and is living free." Samuel died 2 weeks later. At his funeral in Philadelphia, no one mentioned Georgia or the children he left behind there. But Hope attended, traveling north in secret, standing at the back of the church, honoring the man whose choices, wrong, desperate, human, had given her life. The story of the Hargrave scandal became one of those whispered tales in Georgia society, a cautionary story told to enforce racial hierarchies and sexual morality. But as is so often the case, the official story stripped away the humanity, reducing complex people to simple villains and victims. Hope lived her whole life in Savannah, never marrying, working as a teacher for black children after Reconstruction. She died in 1927, 70 years old, carrying with her the last living memory of that summer in 1857 when her father, a young slave named Samuel, broke every rule in a desperate bid for humanity. Her gravestone, simple and weathered, bears only her name and dates. But carved at the bottom, at her instruction, are words that tell the truth more fully than any historical record. Born of love in a world that called it crime, lived with dignity in a world that denied it. Proof that humanity survives even the cruelest systems. The scandal that shocked Georgia in 1857 wasn't really about sex or scandal at all. It was about the fundamental impossibility of maintaining a system that denied the humanity of some while claiming moral superiority for others. It was about how love, desperate, forbidden, destructive love, became a weapon against an unjust order. And it was about hope, the child who survived to tell a truth that Georgia would rather forget, that the lines they drew between people were always illusions, that love and desire recognized no hierarchy, and that trying to deny someone's humanity only revealed your own inhumanity. The Hargrave Plantation stands empty now, a ruin overtaken by kudzu and time. But hope's story lives on, whispered among descendants who understand that their existence is evidence of truths that some would rather stay buried. That in that terrible summer of 1857, 3 people made choices that destroyed them all, but created something that even death couldn't erase. A child who carried within her the possibility of a different world, one where love wasn't a crime and humanity wasn't rationed by skin color. That was what shocked Georgia most of all, not the scandal itself, but the undeniable proof that their carefully constructed world of masters and slaves, superior and inferior, was built on lies that love could shatter.